Or the whole demonization thing is one of the things we are struggling with in Norway, because you start talking about marijuana, and then in the next sentence you're talking about junkies hanging on the corners, not being able to stand, not being able to live, get their lives together. So there's because they're all, marijuana and heroin, they're both drugs, so they must be the same thing. So if you can say heroin is this bad, then of course marijuana must be just as bad. Maybe even worse, because it seems not so bad.
Right. It seems that in Norway, as I understand it, each country has its own strange dialogue. And so now Norway is beginning to be more pragmatic about dealing with the problems of heroin addiction. Some innovative policies and adopting some of the innovations around safe injection or needle exchange or methadone, or experimenting with different drug treatments. And it's just, you may have a fairly still repressive environment here, but there's been a lot of change in Norway compared to 10 years ago in dealing with this. But you have a cannabis thing that still seems fairly primitive in its thinking, and a generational split where the generation of people, it seems to me that there were much smaller percentage of people who were born in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, and 70s smoked cannabis compared to the United States and many other countries. And so there's more a grouping of marijuana, of cannabis with the other drugs, right? Yeah. And I think, what happened in the US was in the 70s, they became separated in people's consciousness. And then in the 80s, marijuana sort of got swept up in the war on cocaine, in part because people who were drug warriors on the right wanted to sweep it all up together. And the marijuana reform movement almost died in the 1980s. What happened then is that it began to become more sensible again. And I think, 2 weeks ago, Marsha and I were at a political gathering. And there was a person who was running for Congress. And he said to us, we were from Colorado, I think. No, Nevada. And he was saying that well, he doesn't like legalization of marijuana because it's a gateway drug. And I pointed out to him that that's a nonsensical argument, because the evidence from the Netherlands really, first of all, the notion of marijuana as a gateway drug, I would describe as an ounce of truth embedded in a pound of bull, right? An ounce of truth in the sense that the vast majority of people who have used heroin or cocaine or gotten in trouble with heroin or cocaine used cannabis beforehand, right? On the other hand, the vast majority of people who have used marijuana never went on to use heroin or cocaine, never went on to even become a habitual marijuana user. So the notion that you can prevent heroin addiction by focusing on stopping marijuana use is analogous to trying to prevent motorcycle fatalities by discouraging bicycle riding, right? I mean, something like 1 out of every 100 cannabis users will eventually become a heroin or cocaine addict. The other point, which the Dutch really made clear, was that when you separate the markets so that cannabis is obtained in a coffee shop, legally regulated, what happens is that's where you go for cannabis. And if you want to get the cocaine or heroin or methamphetamine, you go over there. And those dealers do not carry cannabis, and these ones do not carry the powder drugs because they know they will be shut down and punished and lose their assets if they do. So the evidence from the Netherlands showed that a smaller percentage of cannabis users went on to try the other drugs compared to other places, right? So, I mean, as I said to this guy who was running for Congress, that's not a credible argument, right? The argument against legalization of cannabis is that if you legalize it like alcohol, the price will come down, it will become more available, and therefore more people will use it, and therefore more people may get in trouble with it. It's not that more of those people will go on to use heroin or cocaine, it's that you'll have more marijuana use and maybe more marijuana addiction.